zero-emission mobility. So there will always be matters relating to energy that need to be discussed. So I'm Kathleen De Matera, and I'm from Clean Air Asia. And for this session, more than the technologies and innovation, we want to generate discussions on how policies or institutions can help overcome barriers faced by different stakeholders to facilitate such transition. And if you had a chance to work on a more regional scope for the audience, the presenters, please share insights or start thinking about, if you're in an audience, share insights on what do you think is the level of governance that now has the most opportunity to influence. And think about also where you see are the biggest opportunities and needs for innovation and communication for improved awareness. And we imagine that there are policymakers in the room who are thinking about developing a suitable transition pathway for their respective countries, and to develop a more targeted incentives or regulations for that specific phases of transition. And speaking about the transition, we'd now like to call the first presenter, Dr. Noong Cholaku from the National Metal and Materials Technology Center, or NTEC Thailand. He will be talking about well-to-wheel emission calculations. He's actually a founding member of EVAT, Electric Vehicle Association of Thailand, in 2015, and recently he's been involved in GIZ Transport and Climate Change project, focusing on fuel economy initiatives. So,
thank you. Okay. I don't like to be stationary. So welcome to the session. So I feel very honored to be the first one to give a presentation, but I must say I'm the least knowledgeable person in this session, as you can hear from other four excellent speakers. So I was asked to set up the scene about of course, real zero emission is nice, but how real zero you can get. So what I will take you on the 10-minute presentation is basically telling you how we do what we call wheel to tank to wheel, inventory, to see what kind or what other option for the mobility that we can get or we can use, and then what are the respective environmental impact in there. So this work is actually focused on a local scenario in Thailand, as we have a collaboration with the Toyota Daihatsu engineering and manufacturing in Thailand. So this one, everyone, from LCA is a general broad term. So basically when you say well to tank and tank to wheel, so this is just a simple photo to show you that when we say well, it means like the oil well in the past, right? But of course now when we have other alternative energy or fuel, you can have either, ranging from crude oil, natural gas, LNG, and now we're having in biofuel, which, depending on you have ethanol from sugarcane, or cassava, or you can have the biodiesel from palm oil. And then you have electricity, as we know, electrification of vehicles coming up. And of course, we don't always forget the hydrogen economy in the future. So for tank, it's basically what's tank in your car. It can be a liquid tank, it can be a gas tank, it can be battery that store the energy to propel your vehicle. And then later on, how you can convert that fuel, that gas, or that electricity in battery into the mobility, or how to drive the car. So basically, this is the term, well to tank, is focusing on how you can make the oil into the tank, and then tank to wheel is how you can change the energy, either chemical in your liquid fuel or electrical energy in your battery into the mechanical to move the car. And then this is what we call the wheel to T, wheel to tank, and tank to wheel. And overall, is wheel to wheel. Of course, for the EU standard emission, those kind of things, we only focus on tank to wheel. That's why electric vehicle is good, because it doesn't emit any gas emission, but you have to make sure that you get the electricity cleaner, Then how can you compare between which one is better between electricity that may be using electricity, maybe using electricity from the coal versus biofuel, or even conventional, very good car with fuel economy performance. So this is the typical input you want. For the conventional, of course, you look at the process of the refinery, how much emission that it emits in the refinery. Here for biofuel, of course, biofuel is a bit different, so we need to look at the processing, the fertilizer, and how you move all the feedstock to the mills, and how from the mills, how can you convert it chemically into the liquid fuel, like ethanol, biodiesel. And then electricity, depending on where you come from, hydro, nuclear, coal, or natural gas. And then you get a report like this that, okay, whenever you want to do well to tank, you need to focus on material flow, energy flow, and also get the respective emission that was and output in there. So this is what we use for how about the tank to wheel. So we take the value from the IPCC tier 2, and the reference here is basically what we use to in the calculation for in case of Thailand. And for biofuel, actually for biofuel, everyone know the concept of carbon neutral because we are not digging the carbon from the ground and burn it and contribute the carbon in the air. But in the real process of doing biofuel, you still have, for example, even though for ethanol from corn or sugarcane, you can get it's very renewable, but in the process of emission, you may end up having to emit the methane content. But it's very small. I mean, you compare between this waste figure from biofuel and the typical fossil in there. So this one is basically trying to make sure that we take into account and it doesn't give too much advantage for any fuel, just to be fair. And then we come up with like some graph like this. So for example, if we based on the ICE internal combustion engine with the spark ignition, with the spark plug, and we set that as reference 1. Different colors showing you different process. The blue one is basically well to tank, so how you make a fuel available for your car or your vehicle. And the red one is basically how you convert your energy that's stored in the car into the mobility. So you can see that if you change, let's say this is reference for 1 value, then how you change from the ICE to the plug-in. Of course, when you plug in and you can get the electricity from other renewable source, you can reduce your total emission from using your mobility. Or in the case of Thailand, of course, we have a different choice for how to make electricity, whether from a coal, not so green, or from the, let's for example, biomass is greener. But if you look in the mix of Thailand, of course, this time we don't have 100% coal, we have zero nuclear. But if you do a mixed one, as our plan for the museum energy, then you can sort of see that how electricity mixed case can be reduced further in there. And of course, if you look into the pathway from that, I showed you last slide, right, from the ICE to plug-in hybrid and to BEV, you can get this much reduction, by almost 50%. But if you look in the HV, which is a hybrid electric vehicle, the vehicle that just has a small battery without the charging, the plug, if you introduce the E85, which is ethanol, 85%, then you can further reduce this value down, which may be, incomparable or even better than the BEV in the case of Thailand. So I want to emphasize this is only the case for Thailand, and we are investigating it. And of course, now the question is which better? Which better come with, which is cheaper, which is more acceptable in the society, or which is give you less burden from the government to support in terms of how we can reduce, emission. And of course, we did the whole things like from electric vehicle, we look at different scenarios for ethanol in Thailand, we use 10%, 20%, and 85%. So we have a variety of the choice for the fuel. And for biodiesel also, we have B7, which is a 7% blend mandate. But now we are looking into how to increase the blending more and more because of the overflow of the palm oil feedstock. And then of course, if you look at the LPG, which we used to have subsidy, but now not anymore, it's good. And natural gas, which we used to have a lot in Thailand, but now we have to import. So the game was changing now. It's not so cheap anymore. So how will government has to subsidize the import product? And we saw in many countries subsidy, it may be necessary to beginning, but it's not sustainable. And of course, you can look at the electricity from coal, electricity from natural gas, electricity from the renewable resource, which is nice and green, but of course it costs more money. And then, of course, we have a whole list to be like a reference, guys. And this one, again, focusing on the value that we have in Thailand. And then what we like to show is basically from this, you have many scenarios where you want to go. Of course, for the government, they have to decide which one is can effectively reduce the emission without too much burden from the budget. And I think that would be my last slide. So I don't want to go into detail. We have some section later, and I don't want you to bore you with all these numbers and figures. So thank you. Yes.
Sir, if we can.
We'll have questions later.
Yeah.
Control your session.
If we can save the sessions for the questions for the open forum. So we have about 20-30 minutes for the open forum later. So yeah, we have to make sure that each presenter will have just maybe 10 minutes, 10 to 15 at most, and then so later just have the open forum. Next we'll have Alvin Mejia from the Wuppertal Institute talk about building blocks for accelerating mobility in Asian cities.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll give Axel 5 minutes of my time. So good morning, everyone. I'm here to talk about, my presentation is a non-technical one. I'm going to talk about the events that are happening in the, one of the initiatives that the Urban Electro Mobility Initiative is working on in Kochi, India, to give you a flavor of how the different levels of governance are playing a role in terms of the accelerating the urban electro initiatives there. So UMI, it's a European Commission funded project solutions. It aims to support the urban mobility implementation actions that contribute to the Paris Agreement and the new urban agenda. So it also looks into tracking international actions and delivers tools and guidelines. I'll give you the website link later on for those of you who are interested in the different materials that we have. It's basically a partnership of multiple organizations from private sector, academia, international development institutions, and we do a lot of information sharing. So if you go to the uemi.net website, you'll see a lot of things on fact sheets on urban mobility solutions, as well as publications on plans and policies for sustainable transport, looking at also specifically on the readiness on electrification of the transportation sector, EV readiness tools, and assessment documents. So if you're interested, these are very updated. Most of these were published only this year. So, so aside from those, there are a lot of activities in terms of conversations, in terms of capacity building as well. In terms of the actual projects on the ground, the initiative is also working on coming up with pilot projects that are envisioned to become large-scale bankable projects later on. So as I mentioned, the first one is Kochi, India, looking at the e-rickshaws, and in Hanoi and Haiphong, looking at e-scooter sharing. I'll be focusing on this one for today because of the limited time. So basically, the pilot project in Kochi, it's looking into a small scale 10 to 15 e-rickshaws, which are seen to alleviate the contribution of the auto rickshaws, which is about less than half of the city total transportation CO2 emissions. And well, what we're trying to see here in terms of the interlinkages between the different levels of governance, the national level updates in terms of the policy, it has been supported in terms of looking at targets. So for example, there was a target in terms of 100% share of the new vehicle sales by 2030. There's a bit of revision in terms of looking at 30% of the fleet being electrified in 2030. But there have been multiple building blocks in terms of, for example, the coming up of the National Electric Mobility Mission Plan in 2013, and the FAME program for incentivizing hybrid and electric vehicles in 2015. There was a National E-Mobility Plan that was from the Ministry of Power just this year, and this is going to be implemented by a public company under the ministry, as well as some initiatives from the NITI Aayog in terms of coming up with a committee on zero-emissions vehicles to look into the various aspects of having electric vehicles in India. For example, this is also quite important. Ministry of Power also declared that the charging stations would not require a license, considering it as a service, which makes it a bit easier to implement this. There have been guidelines for charging infrastructure, as well as guidelines for power distribution companies. So at the state level, there has been also support from the state of Kerala in terms of approving the operations of rickshaws, and a policy to promote eco-friendly electric vehicles in conjunction with plans to issue future taxi permits only to e-rickshaws to be able to reduce the number of conventional three-wheelers. In terms of the challenges as the project is being implemented right now, there has been a disconnect, I guess, challenges in terms of devolving the national and state policies at the local level. For example, there was an issuance in terms of the actual definition of what a rickshaw is and what it would mean in terms of some of the requirements. But the devolution, there was the local governments would have to decide their own regulations in how to apply the national guidelines. So that part is still missing, and this has resulted in some confusion in terms of hierarchy, documentation, and delays in implementing such projects. As with previous applications in other places, there are also negative public perceptions because of for example, the operating speeds and what it's compared to right now. So for the diesel and gasoline e-rickshaws. There's also a lack of supporting street infrastructure. So I guess space is a premium, and the old areas in the city are highly dense. It's also a bit challenging to come up with things like parking spots for the rickshaws, shelter for waiting areas, etc. Long charging times, expensive battery technologies. I guess these would be covered later on. In terms of the institutions, there's a lack of professional associations, at least in Kochi, not as compared to, for example, the big cities like in Delhi. You have a consortium of the different operators, the manufacturers, etc. And also, one consideration is really the availability of maintenance facilities and spare parts at this stage. So to finish up my presentation, in terms of building blocks, we know there's conducive policy environments at the national, subnational levels. But we need to develop these policies at the local level more effectively. We need to take into account dimensions that are outside of transport per se. So we look at the infrastructure, we look at power, we look at other things as well. Of course, funding and financing, we need commitments, we need innovations in terms of how we can generate more funds for these projects. Changing mindsets, really establishing the demand. So it has to be there. People need to appreciate the benefits of having these vehicles. Institutional capacity development, linkage creation would be needed as well. Soundness and verifiability of the assumptions. I guess for example, in some of the cases that have been recently, for example, in the Philippines, the scaling down of the e-trike project there are a lot of, I guess, assumptions that could not stand on their own when verified. And we need to take into consideration local context, so there's no one size fits all. But also, I guess, having a broader mindset with all of these, we also probably need to take a closer look at life cycle assessments in terms of, for example, acidification impacts, human toxicity impacts, terrestrial ecotoxicity impacts, primarily also due to the supporting activities like the mining of the resources that you would need for the electric vehicles. But you also need to capitalize on the co-benefits, particularly in terms of messaging and how we want to accelerate the adoption of electro mobility in our cities. So thank you very much.
Thanks. I like the last part where you mentioned about the co-benefits because cities in Asia are raising the alarm on air pollution, and I think that's the greatest messaging at the moment that we can tell policymakers. So next, as you can see, we are not just talking about four-wheelers. You will hear more about two- and three-wheelers later on in the discussions. But now we want to look into sorry, so now we want to welcome Dr. Axel Friedrich to talk about lessons from the Dieselgate and implications for zero emissions in Europe.
Yes, going into, not in the future, but in today problems and what we can learn for the future. I think that's important. And lessons learned is important. You can learn what we have done in Europe. Unluckily, our mistakes are repeated here in Asia again, mostly in the speed of 10 times. So might be we can avoid some of the mistakes, not all, at least some. Might be it's more interesting to make new mistakes, not the old ones. So, first. You have a standard for air quality in Europe, which has to be met by the cities. All cities in Europe, on every location where people are, which is important. And therefore, we have a limit for particles to 2.5 PM10 and nitrogen dioxide. And this standard of nitrogen dioxide, 40 micrograms per annual mean, is violated widely in Europe. In spite of the fact that my own group and my own agency, we calculate what should be the limit to meet this standard. And we implemented these emission limits, but you see, progress is very, very slow. Normally it should go down like this, as we have with other pollutants, and nothing happens. So, and if you look on the directive, it said clearly, this should be to reduce nitrogen oxide so we meet these standards I mentioned before. That was the goal of the directive. But what happened? Also in the directive, we have a wording which is very, very important to ban defeat devices. Defeat devices are measures from car manufacturers to go around the legislation. So cheating is a better word for it. So it's forbidden under all conditions. And member states should have penalties which are high enough to avoid this cheating. But even now, 3 years after Dieselgate, but went public, it was before, Germany has not implemented this EU directive. And only, I think, UK just brought a law to the parliament. That's the only one. These are the limits, and the limit is going down for nitrogen oxides. It's from 180 down to 80. Before it was 350, before it was 500. So you should see at least reduction in the real world. But, as you can see, the emission standard is 180 for Euro 5, and the emission in real world is 906. Only 400 times 1% above the limit. If you go to Euro 4, the difference was only 170%. So the emission factor for Euro 4 is lower than for Euro 5. Which is not very logical. Huh? If you go to Euro 6, you have still 500 milligram in spite of the fact the limit is 80. This is an average of all manufacturers on real world. If you see the separate manufacturers, this is cars I measured myself. This time the maximum was 1,380. The limit is 80. Can you imagine? This is real world. This, if I cut out these 10 worst, you see, it's Fiat 500, Renault Captur, Mercedes, Ford Mondeo, Nissan, Renault, Ford, Opel, Focus, and Jeep. It's all the same manufacturer, but what you realize, it's not the Volkswagen in it. It's no Audi, it's no Skoda, it's no Porsche, no Seat. And the first is no manufacturer from the Volkswagen group in the Euro 6 group. And we call it Volkswagen scandal. It's not a Volkswagen scandal, it's diesel scandal. And they're all cheat. They're all cheat. Here's a hit list from the 10 best. 8 of 10 best cars measured on the road are coming from Volkswagen group. And we call it now a Volkswagen scandal. So learn the lesson, they're much better than the rest. Here you see an example, Renault Espace. And normally, if you measure a car, cold start is worse than warm start. That's a normal, you also have to warm up the vehicle, the catalyst has to warm up. What we see here, the warm start is much, much higher than the coal start, much, much higher. This is against physical and chemical logic. This is clearly shown. This manufacture sheet dramatically. Dramatically. On a dynamometer. This is not real world. Even on a dynamometer you can see it. So they recognize the car is make a cold start test on a dynamometer. If you make the same driving cycle, nothing else, same driving cycle, it's not real world. You see emission explode. Daimler was recalled 300,000 vehicles in meantime because they argued, oh, it's all legal. This is clearly illegal. How this was detected? Again, I made a measurement of a veto and a D glass. Again, the emission in the cold start was much lower than in the warm start. So I sent this result to the Ministry of Transport and the GBA, Ministry of Environment, and they made a retest and they found exactly. Nearly all recalls, any of the thing, was started with measurement of my group. This is a scandal. It was not done by government. It was done by NGOs. Also in France, the scandal, we started. The Minister of Environment said, no, Renault and Nissan don't cheat. And we went to public and showed this. Italy, same thing happened. Not the government. UK, not the government. NGOs, I have done. I have done now more than 1,000 road tests. This is more than all other manufacturers. But we can have a solution for this. Make retrofit with SCR. So we made a so-called cheating Volkswagen Passat, and this was again around 1,000 milligram NOx, so much above the 180. But if you make a retrofit with the SCR system, it's 52. So you can reduce this emission of these cars by 95% by hardware retrofits. And the cost of this is less than 1,500 euros. And now we ask the manufacturer should pay for it. It's not the customer should pay for it. They cheated and they have to repair it. But nothing happens. So we went to court. We have now, I think, 40 court cases running against cities and governments. Some of them, and this is the most, running against cities and states because violating the 40 microgram annual mean I mentioned. So, and we until now we won all court cases. The next is today. We have now 10 court cases won. The next is today for 2 other cities. So, and this you see, it's banned the diesel, not older, but not meeting Euro 6. So all cars from Euro 5 and older will be banned from next year. I tell you, it was not an easy debate in Europe, in Germany. If you ban more than half of the diesel fleet, no more, 70% of diesel fleet, people are not very happy. Government is not very happy. They want to avoid the diesel ban. And this is coming now to the zero emission. So you see where it's all, these decisions are made. Gelsenkirchen in Essen is today. We won Düsseldorf, we won Aachen, we won Cologne, we won Wiesbaden is next week, Offenbach, Darmstadt, Mainz. So we all won. So the government started so-called diesel summit to avoid diesel ban, not to avoid the pollution to the people, just to avoid the ban of cars. And they have decided to start a fund for sustainable mobility, which we asked for years. And now suddenly we got 1 billion. Not to protect the people, just to avoid the ban of cars. So, and we have now in 28 regions, which is virtually nearly all over Europe, this money can be spent. As example for intelligent transport system, intermodal transport solutions, organization, and public transport. Most of the money is going to public transport, which we are pushing for years and were not successful. But also we got 200 million annually for bicycle improvement. So it's not only that we have something to do on the car. The government trying to avoid this because they know it's not possible otherwise by improving the normal zero-emission vehicle. And bicycle is one of this. So e-buses. And we have not many e-buses because buses are not ready really. But they get money now up to 80% of the additional cost. cities can get. So all the e-vehicles for taxis and for city fleets, we get now 40% of additional investment cost. So anything which we asked for years is now easily ready to 1 billion euros. So charging structure, because if you have electric vehicles, you need to charge. So if you have a car, and I rented once and I was lost because I had no charging point. So clearly it was shown by this project. Additional 300 million euros were set aside to have a network of 50,000 charging points in Germany, which is enough. Can you imagine? Just by these court cases, we promoted zero-emission vehicles. Structures. Not funny? Why NGOs have to force the government to do the right thing? Not from alone, just by court decisions. It made us not very popular, can you imagine? I got emails which are not very friendly, you can imagine. So it's in the shitstorm, I'm in the middle, and my friend Jürgen Reich is even worse. So we have, and Dorothy, which is the other section now, we have a lot of emails, not on Twitter and others saying things, I don't read this. So I come to the conclusion. If you adopt standards and you don't control it, forget it. In the last days we had all these discussions on introducing Euro 5 and Euro 6 in Asia. This is not solving your problems. Industry will cheat as long as they can if they're not controlled. If they can get more money out of it, they do. Even if the difference only 20 euros, they do it. Nothing else. You have to understand, if you're not controlling, you get not what you want to have. So we have many of these things, and I mentioned on Tuesday on CO2. The same thing happens on CO2. So all the sheet. We have to understand, you have to control it. And unluckily, control in Asian countries is not very strong. Let's say carefully. So what we can do? We can today control the vehicle with the so-called RDE test, which is now possible for every country. You have to buy just the so-called PEMS, Porting Measurement System. And the price is not so high. For a really good one, which you need for certification, is 120,000 euros. If you want to control import of cars, you can have one for 30,000 euros. So it's today possible for every country here in Asia. And it might be we need a good seminar how to make good RDE tests with PEMS. It's not magic, but you have to learn and understand a little bit on the thing. It's not very complicated, but you have to learn it at least a week or 2 weeks and come to end. And of course, it has to be transparent. Why we have to measure? Why these results are not published by the government? The same thing happens here. Nothing is transparent. Why? I buy a car and don't get any information on the car. If I buy a TV, I get everything. Energy consumption, color room, and everything. But if you buy a car, you get nothing. No information. Why? You pay for it. So, and yesterday I also heard, it's too costly, we cannot do it. Just introduce a small fee for each registration of a new vehicle. €1 per vehicle would be enough to have a very, very efficient control system in every country here in Asia. €1 per vehicle, not more. This, I think, people have to understand. It's nothing magic. It's very simple. It's not very costly. You can do it, and you should do it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Axel. Interesting how that what happened there spurred so many actions globally, not just in Germany. Hopefully it paved the way for private and public sector collaborations. Maybe later on you can tell us more about that during the open forum. Next we'll have, so we've heard about the four-wheelers, we've heard about rickshaws also in Kochi. Now we'll hear more about the two-wheeler opportunities and challenges opportunities and challenges regarding the electric two-wheelers in Southeast Asia from Dr. Horizon Gitano.
Thank you very much, everybody. Good morning. It's nice to see you all here. Thank you to our previous speakers because you very nicely introduced many of the topics we're going to be looking at today. Let me get started because this is a very short period of time. First, I just want to very briefly introduce myself. My name is Horizon. Was a professor at the university here in Malaysia, so actually stationed here. I run a technology company that's involved in vehicle measurement systems, dynamometers, emission systems, etc. Also, I am the chairman of the Electric Vehicle Standards Committee for Malaysia. It was previously just two-wheelers, but has expanded to three and light-duty four-wheelers as well. And I do a lot of consulting with GIZ, UNFCCC, etc., etc. So this is, I'm from the technology end sort of up. Everyone is fanatic about electric vehicles, and the problem is they're all looking at cars. Electric vehicles are extremely popular. They're just not cars. They're these very small, typically two-wheel type vehicles. We've seen them spring up in the last few years, as many of the countries have, they're very, very popular. And that's one of the issues. In fact, you see several of the other issues here, like, for example, no helmets, they're being driven by children, etc., etc. So I think this immediately you can already see some of the issues that are going to be faced by many of these countries. We have in Malaysia three different classifications of electric two-wheelers in our standards. There's the bicycle class, the motorcycle class, and then this e-scooter class, which is 20 to 50 kph. It is by far the most popular vehicle we see on the roads. Different countries will have different mixes of three-wheelers, four-wheelers, and two-wheelers and sizes, but you'll see that generally these tend to be very light-duty vehicles, which is one of the issues with them. Another issue with them is who uses them. And we see that there's about 50% of the drivers are either young, which I would classify as children, or old, which I would classify as grandparents. That is somewhat different than the more conventional vehicles, which are heavily biased towards this, sort of a parent-age person. And again, there's very good reasons for that: the ease of use, the cost, the drivability, etc., etc. Now, this is a very brief comparison, and no, it's not very hardcore, but I wanted to show sort of the overall trend. A conventional motorcycle is listed down at the bottom, and one of the things about that, it has a very predictable lifespan. You know when you buy it, 3 liters of fuel goes 160 kilometers. 10 years from now, 3 liters of fuel goes 160 kilometers. And the engine will last 10 years. With the electric vehicles, it has usually they have a stated range, and that's one of the important parameters for the consumers. The problem is you don't know if it's going to have the same range in 6 months, much less 2 years. What we see is that well-designed vehicles, the batteries can last 3 years or more. The more expensive lithium ions, after 3 years, their batteries have degraded almost none. In the poorer quality ones, the batteries degrade after, say, 6 months. So when you look at the costing, it's very difficult because you need the lifetime cost. And that was one of the things that was mentioned earlier as being a very important thing to look at, because with a conventional vehicle, lifetime cost is known. With one of these light-duty electric vehicles, you don't know the lifetime cost because you don't know how often you have to replace batteries. Now, if anything sticks with you today, there's really like 2 graphic images. This should be one of them. These small light-duty electric vehicles are much, much more efficient than cars. 6 guys on 6 bikes is more efficient than 6 guys in 1 car. That's how efficient they are. Now, yes, there are various efficiencies in these vehicles, but in general, they're extremely light. They're only the amount of vehicle you need for the trip for most single-person or 2-person short-range commuter trips. Why are they so efficient? Well, here's a little bit of technical detail. This is the efficiency of an electric motor system as a function of speed and torque. And typically, if you were to launch on one of these small vehicles, you pretty much, the throttle is a switch. It's on and off. You don't drive it at part throttle. So you'd be operating on this red curve, and you can see your efficiencies are somewhere between 80 plus percent efficient. Now that doesn't include the well to tank, that is the charging, that's a separate efficiency. So therefore, these vehicles have become extremely popular. We see in Bangladesh, India, they're being used to replace the Bajaj tuk-tuks. They're really one of the best applications this is seen in India. They're being used as first mile, last mile in connection with a commute on a mass rapid transit system or something like that. What factors are important to customers? Just look at an advert. This one happens to be from the Philippines. Cost, speed, range, power. Vehicle lifespan is very important, but again, they don't usually report that. Why? Well, as our good friend, Dr. Axel said, they cheat. They will quote you some lifespan, and that's under the absolute best conditions. It is imperative to test and verify. So the standards that we create generally cover all of these. Cost is a known factor and not part of it. Now again, looking at quality and some technical data, looking at quality and battery type, lead acid batteries, some people think of them as low quality, they'll never survive in a vehicle. Actually they can. The problem is they can only survive a reasonable lifespan. Our minimum spec is 300 charge-discharge cycles, which represents about 2 years of normal use. They can last that long, but only if they're 50% depth of discharge, which means you can only use half of the capacity of that battery each time you use it. If you want to use even less, it'll last even longer, but typical lead acid battery systems, good ones last somewhere in here, bad ones fail very early, and we see that on a lot of the really inexpensive incoming products. Lithium batteries tend to last over here closer to the 1,000 cycle. One of the issues with these light-duty electric vehicles is they're faster than pedestrians. If you use them on sidewalks, you have a conflict with pedestrians. If you use them in a road, you have a conflict with traffic. They're too fast for pedestrians and too slow for roads. This image is actually from Singapore, and so that's one of the fundamental issues. This pertains to standards and legislation. What do you do about it? So what I recommend is let's look at the de facto usage. What we see is typically the bicycle class vehicles are used on sidewalks with pedestrians. If it's below 25 kph, that's probably acceptable. Singapore recently said for bicycle usage, bicycle path or pedestrian path usage, it has to be 10 kph and below, which is quite slow. Maybe if you're in the region of 20 to 50 kph, in countries like Malaysia, it's acceptable to use the shoulder or the extreme left lane. And that's sort of like normal usage in Malaysia already. For faster vehicles, they can go on maybe the other lanes. And then if you're above, say, 80 kph, you can run on any road pretty much in Malaysia. Due to their popularity, overload, simple numbers can be a problem. Looking at this is in China, and I think 80+% of these are electric vehicles. They can become so popular that they overwhelm the city's infrastructure, so they do need to be managed. How do you manage them? This is my suggestion. You start with good urban planning. You start with good transportation infrastructure and distributed transportation hubs, and then the electric two-wheeler is used for the first mile, last mile, allowing you to link to pretty much any point within your city. I think it has to be looked at in terms of integrating it into the overall transportation, public transportation picture in your city in order to make it successful. Charging, everybody's worried about charging. These guys, the current is not a big issue. They're fairly low current. You can charge them from a normal outlet. The problem is we don't have normal outlets where we park the bikes, and most of their chargers are for indoor use only. They're not waterproof, so there's a shock hazard. So there's some fairly straightforward standards that need to take place. As was mentioned earlier, charging takes hours, so that could be an issue. Oh, anybody interested in this, I can provide you all this information and the standards from Malaysia as well. So the policy challenges, standards are very important for safety, quality, and compatibility. Our standards cover things like performance, braking, shock and vibe, drop tests, EMI, EMC, hill climb, safety, et cetera, et cetera. The standards requesting, standards testing does, you cannot pass a standard if you can't test to it. Don't spec something you can't test to. And verify, you absolutely have to do it. Fortunately for these light duty vehicles, the test equipment is not prohibitively expensive. The decisions that need to be made by the policymakers, by you guys in this room, is what about road usage, what about safety equipment, registration, and insurance. One of the biggest issues we have is there's poor statistics. Bangladesh, they have 600,000 units on the road, and they have zero information about them because they're not registered. Accident statistics. I mean, we need data to drive policy. We shouldn't just invent policy on our own. So this just shows sort of a matrix of some of our policy recommendations here, and by the various classes. It rains a lot in Southeast Asia, so the standards have to cover that. Most of the international standards do not cover this. So what did we do? We came up with a very simple rain test. There was a very complex Japanese rain test. It cost a lot to do. We said, stick it in a shower, put this much water on it, and see if it works. Okay, anybody can do this. Hill climb. What hill climb do you need? Well, what's the maximum inclination in gazetted roads in your country? It's pretty straightforward. Charge discharge. So one of the probably the biggest thing that's missing is the battery lifetime. I'm very pleased with this. We were able to put this into all of this. I'm also very pleased that my company actually produces this equipment. We have failures. When we test these light-duty vehicles, a lot of them are based on bicycles. The bicycle components are not heavy enough to be used. This is a failure from some testing we did of basically bicycle rims used on the electric vehicle. The batteries are heavy, and the rims will fail. So, in conclusion, these electric two-wheelers are exceptionally efficient. Their popularity, due to the sheer numbers, winds up creating a problem. Internal combustion engine vehicles have a predictable lifetime. Electric vehicles do not. That's why it's very important to test the battery life cycle time, which takes a long time to do. They often use very light components. The electric three-wheel auto rickshaws are not as heavy duty as the Bajaj. You just take a look at them. They don't weigh anywhere near as much. They're not as heavy duty. Standards testing is crucial to ensure safety and a reasonable level of quality. You don't need extremely tight specs, but you do have to test your specs. Data is required to formulate the appropriate policies. Let's see. So this is I think one of the areas where we were mentioning global regional cooperation. This is happening now. It is a great area for cooperation in terms of standards, adopting standards, even the way we generate standards. We have a seminar on how you generate standards, sharing data, sharing experiences. So I think a forum like this is really good. If you have any questions, if you want the Malaysian standards, feel free to get a hold of me. If you can't get this down fast enough, you can contact the folks here. I'm available pretty much any time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Horizon. It's always important to think about the users, and standards are meant to eliminate the clearly deficient products. And so, and standards are meant to challenge the technology. And I learned one key takeaway also for me is if you can't spec it, don't spec it if you cannot measure it, and therefore it's important to develop the test facilities in parallel. Okay, next we'll have Mr. Shuichi Ichikawa from Toyota Motor Corporation. He's part of the Research and Development and Engineering Management Division, and he's been with Toyota for 3 decades. And recently, from 2007 to 2013, he served as subcommittee gasoline leader at the Fuels and Lubricants Committee at the Japan Automobile Manufacturers Association, or JAMA, establishing quality assurance standards for biofuels too. So he's here to talk about Toyota's roadmap to real zero-emission mobilities.
Thank you, Democrat, for introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Shoichi Ichikawa. I'm from Toyota Motor Corporation Japan today. Okay. today I am the only speaker from manufacturer. But as Mr. Alexson criticize manufacturer, but I will speak a little bit different. Okay, we Toyota set our own ambitious target to contribute to the environment rather than just just follow the environment regulation set by the authorities. In October 2015, we Toyota announced Toyota Environmental Challenge 2050, as shown here. There are 6 challenges. Number 1 is the CO2 zero emission challenge for new vehicle. Number 2 is the life cycle CO2 zero challenge. Number 3 is the plant CO2 zero challenge. And then number 4 is the challenges for minimizing and optimizing water usage. And number 5, establishing a recycling-based society. And finally, number 6 is establishing future society in harmony with nature. Today, I'd like to focus on one of the challenges, zero CO2 emission challenge with new vehicles. Toyota set the target for reducing tailpipe CO2 emissions of new vehicles by 90% in 2050 through the expansion of xEV products. xEV products means hybrid electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles, and battery EVs. Motor, battery, and inverters are the core components for the xEV products and commonly used for all the electrified vehicles. So I think starting with hybrid electric vehicle is the most effective way and first step to expand our product range to all the xEV products. And those core components enable development of all the xEV products. This slide shows Toyota's xEV products or electrified vehicle milestones. In 1997, we have introduced first mass production xEVs, and in 2014, we have introduced fuel cell EVs, first in the world. And for us, as the next milestone, the first milestone will be the introduction of battery EVs by 2020. And early in 2020s, our product range for battery EV will be about 10 battery EV models. And second milestone will be electrified version available for all vehicle models by 2025. And next, finally, the third milestone. We are aiming to introduce electrified vehicles about more than 50% of our global sales. That means about 5.5 million units of vehicles expected to be electrified vehicles, including battery EV and FCEVs, about 1 million units among them. Okay, upon introduction of the xEV products, we also consider the energy status of each country to best fit for the energy status in each country and contribute to the most better society and mobility. For example, for Norway, we may introduce battery because it is abundant in hydropower-based power generation, hydro-based renewable power electricity. And for Japan, for example, we will introduce FCEVs because energy security is one of the most important issues of the country. Biofuel also is one of the ways to reduce CO2 emission of the vehicles. For the country, abundant in biofuels, even with engine-equipped vehicles, it is possible to reduce tailpipe CO2 emission by using biofuels. Thailand, as an example, in the country where rich in bioethanol production, as mentioned in Dr. Noon's presentation, the combination of the hybrid electric vehicle and the use of EAD biofuel can contribute lowest WTW, well-to-wheel CO2 emission, rather than battery EVs, based on the condition of the power generation, CO2 emission of the power generation. However, each type of the XCV product have its own advantage. This chart summarizes the characteristics of each type of XCV products. Hybrid electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, they use motor and engines and emit emissions while running. On the other hand, battery EV and FCV only uses motor, and their most advantage is potential for achieving zero emissions. Hybrid EV and plug-in hybrid, the advantage is long cruising distance and also infrastructure or network for refueling. On the other hand, the battery EV and FCV, they still need infrastructure for the refueling, especially for fuel cell EV. The supply chain for the hydrogen still need to be developed. And this chart summarizes categorization of XCV product. We believe that diversification of XCV product is more important because to cover all the category of the vehicles or usage mode to fulfill users' need, not only one type of the XCV cannot afford to do it. For example, battery EV only cannot cover all the category and usage mode, especially for the heavy-duty commercial trucks for logistic or delivery use. And as a result, it may put restriction for achieving real zero emission by all the category of the vehicles. That's why we believe that diversification of XCV product is more important and essential. Toyota will approach all the type of XCV technologies together with energy diversity by making use of biofuel, electricity, and hydrogen. This chart shows a society, future sustainable society, where all type of XCV products coexist. In the future sustainable society, we believe that diversification of energy sources is necessary by aiming to minimize use of fossil fuels and maximize use of renewable energy. This includes sophisticated energy grid system and management system for the electricity. Excess amount of hydrogen electricity raised by generated by renewable energy source like solar or wind will be stored as hydrogen. Then by using this hydrogen, electricity can be generated when it is necessary. Okay, this is my last slide. Towards a carbon-free society and mobility, and to achieve real zero emission mobility, we believe a cooperation among all the stakeholders are required. As an automotive manufacturer, we will provide a product which has a potential for achieving real zero emission. However, without supply of renewable electricity or CO2-free hydrogen, the real zero emission CO2 emission will never be achieved. And if customer acceptance is not obtained, expansion of the XCV product cannot be expected. So the policy to promote use of XCV, promote XCV and encourage use of them will be required. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ichikawa. I'm sure you have now all many questions in your mind, so we will open the floor and start our open forum. Though I just want to mention that we in UN Environment is also supporting this electric mobility. But electric mobility for us is not just cars. So we are starting projects in Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam on electric 2- and 3-wheelers. Also supporting electric buses transition. Of course, also cars. So, but like what I said, I'm sure you have many questions now, and so we have. Sorry, who is there? We have Axel first.
Okay, life cycle analysis is a very good tool, but it's a complex tool. And I welcome that people here in Asia now look on this tool, but you have to look on the whole picture. If I go to biofuel, we have in Europe a directive, as you know, which also includes land use change. And if you look also at indirect land use change, most of the biofuels don't look as good as it was shown here. What does it mean, land use change? If you increase production, you have to convert land to different use. And this means you created, by this change, also increase of greenhouse gases. Especially if you have, let's say, a peatland in Indonesia, which we have many there, and if you convert this, you get a disastrous balance. So if you have palm oil, you can see the balance is mostly very, very bad. The same is also for sugarcane, which is also not as good as it was presented. So if you look more in detail on the subject, I would warn you, don't believe without land use change consideration, we have a complete picture. Same is on hydrogen. If you make hydrogen with different sources, mostly it's negative. It was said we have zero-emission hydropower. This is also not correct. Why? We have to consider the methane emissions from these reservoirs, especially here in the tropic, where a lot of leaves and wood falls in these areas. And you get, by this, a huge production of methane. So, just warning you, if you don't look on the whole picture, you make wrong decisions politically. The same is on batteries. If you look on the rucksack of batteries produced by coal power in China, which you have 1,100 grams CO2 per kilowatt hour, you have to drive at least 150,000 kilometers to get a positive balance. If you have zero-emission electricity, which you don't have mostly. But most cars, electric vehicle only runs per year in Europe. I made an analysis, less than 7,000 kilometers a year. So if you run for 10 years, you are not in a positive balance, as long as you have not changed the production of the batteries. So just give you one example why all these analyses are not complete. The argument in Norway, we have abundant electricity, is not correct. Why? Norway is connected to the rest of Europe. All the production of the electricity is separate, distributed in Europe. Even though Norway uses all his electricity now, any additional request gives additional problems. So even in Norway now we have a stop of new production of hydropower, because the impact to environment is not only greenhouse gas, also the impact to environment is negative. So only want to warn you, don't believe you can make any decision with any negative consequences. Nothing is for free. It's no free lunch. Lunch is expensive. Here we get free lunch, but in real life it's not free. You have to work and make sure that this negative impact as low as possible. Mostly people don't do it because they got the right picture. If you say sugarcane is good, look on the emissions. You get an increase of the emission of aldehydes. If you look on aldehydes, you get an increase of ozone. Just to make a little bit more complex picture. I can make for hours on these subjects. How complex these issues are and how decisions of government
idea is we make it as low as possible. I think any decision we make will have environmental impacts, and we make it as low as possible. Of course, the lowest is just walking. So maybe we just pave our cities, yeah, or cycling. So that is the real zero emissions mobility. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to understand a little bit further about Toyota's strategy in developing the different cleaner vehicles. You start off with Leaf is the really first generation of the hybrid, and it should have dominated the market, but then it seems that Toyota just stopped there. And now it seems that you're going to go for this fuel cell, launch the fuel cell first instead of the plug-in hybrid. Then the electric version is a little bit, I mean, even further away. I just want to understand the logic behind it. While every people is already, I mean, big manufacturers already going for electric directly. So what was the logic behind Toyota? Do you not scared that the market's already been penetrated, and then when you have the electric, then the market's not yours, it's already others? I just want to understand your logic. Why are you doing like this?
Thank you very much for your question. But of course, we may have introduced earlier the FCV earlier than battery EV. But I don't think this is not based on the logic or something like that. We just tried higher hurdles at first for introduction of FCV, because the introduction with battery EV is not so that much difficult. That's why we just tried first, and we never think FCV is first, battery EV is next, or something else. As I mentioned in my presentation, all the mixture is necessary. All will coexist at the same time. So, is this reply to your question? We don't have any logic that FCV is first or battery EV is later.
I just want to actually. Although Axel was talking about other defects of batteries, but then if you're looking at the car, it really saves people a lot of money by turning it into a motor, and it just battery in a motor, rather than traditional engine. Engine needs a lot of maintenance. It costs a lot of money for maintenance. A lot of problem is the IM problem for the used vehicles. So just for that particular reason, we need to go fast. But then for the Toyota, I'm very impressed with your battery actually, because so far your hybrid car, the batteries actually, I think is not worse than any other of your competitors. I appreciate your research ability in developing the batteries, but I just don't understand why you don't jump directly to battery and then make a real competition to other big manufacturers. You rather just going into the hybrid and then plug-in hybrid, and then eventually you get into the electric. I don't understand the path. I mean, I don't totally get what you were saying in answering the question.
Yeah, this is perfect. Over beer, I think. You ask Mr. Ishikawa over beer.
Yes. I can give you some comments. Of course, you're right. We have to go to electric batteries, but we have to reduce the roadside. And of course, we have some transition. And a conventional hybrid is a good transition. Unluckily, it's not deployed in many areas in Asia because we have no control on the CO2 emissions, no regulations. So the share of hybrids in Europe is much higher, Same here. Why? We have a lot of legislation. So why we get the good cars and you get the bad cars here in Asia? This would my question to Toyota. Why we get this jump? Why we have not better cars here? Why we have the Toyota Prius 4 consume 3 liter per 100 kilometers? If you go out, and I made a survey 2 years ago on the fair in Jakarta, and it was all the manufacturers have not given the best cars to this area. This is my question. Why we have no legislation? Second point, people talk about many other options. And I just said, we have to go to zero emission in 2050. You have to be zero if you want to fulfill the Paris Agreement. Zero, not 30 or 40% less. 100% go to zero emissions. And you have a long way to go, but not many time, not much time. If you want to use renewable energy efficiently, hydrogen and all these other things are out. Because if you convert energy, you lose energy. If you convert twice, you lose more energy. See, and we have not this renewable energy. We will be happy if we get all transition to renewable energy in 2050. But we have nothing to waste. And if you produce hydrogen or if you thin fuel, you waste energy. So overall this is less efficient. If you go to hydrogen, efficiency might be in the range with the fuel cell in the range of 25%. Electric vehicle in the range of 80%. If you go to thin fuel, even lower. So all these things make studies as people started here, but not to the end. To show the politicians, if they make decisions, what are the best solutions? In our opinion, electric vehicle is the best one. But not with batteries which last for 600 kilometers. We have not resources. We have not only power and greenhouse gas, but also what resources we have. If you go to cobalt, if you go to lithium, if you go to coltan, these not available. So we need smaller batteries, which means smaller cars, lighter cars, maybe a range extender, but not plug-ins. Plug-ins are 2 mistakes in one car. So you have to understand, you make your car heavier. This means you could consume much more fuel if you don't run on a plug electricity. So a lot of these things told by the manufacturer or by some people are not scientifically sound. And I think we both agree, it has to be on a good basis. And if you look on the basis, most of the things are not working, purely not working. I like fuel cells. I made my engineer thesis on this a long time ago. I like it. For chemists, you put some chemicals in and get residuals. But the efficiency is not as high as people tell you. If you look on real world, you're in the range of 30–35%. And then you have the hydrogen. Convert the hydrogen, again you have 60%. Multiply this, all this efficiency, you're in the range of, if you're happy, 25%, not more. And this is not what we need. Believe me, I'm working on these subjects now a very long time. Also biofuels. I really look on all this development in Asia of biofuels, and I'm very, very worried. Very worried.
Regulations, yeah, definitely. Most of the hybrid vehicles are categorized as luxury vehicles, so that's why the taxes are still high, and it's not favored by consumers.
Thank you. I wanted to reiterate and really applaud some of the statements made up until this point and do a little bit of recap. First of all, what Axel said about compliance and enforcement, needing to test, to verify emissions performance. This is really critical and it's very cheap. I totally reiterate that point about a very small vehicle fee for every registration, €1, is sufficient to provide governments with the capacity to then develop those testing facilities. Another element there is to think about that as one of the key inputs to the road to zero emissions transportation. That we don't need to only promote, say, the zero emission solutions, we also need to tighten and reduce the incentives for the high emitting transportation. So thinking about the regulatory framework, the fiscal incentives, and other market-based measures, all as pointing in the same direction of making it more difficult or tightening on high emitting vehicles over time, and then incentivizing zero emissions transport with special attention given to walking and bicycling, the true, only say real zero emission transport, no even manufacturing production. So thinking about all this together is really, really important to make sure that all the incentives point in the same direction.
Not just high emitting vehicles, but the biggest problem that we see in developing countries, actually I think in the West too, is an inappropriate vehicle. If you go to the US, you see everyone commuting back and forth to work in a dual axle diesel pickup truck with a 10-cylinder engine. What, you know, it's a single passenger vehicle. He's picking up microwavable popcorn and he needs a 1-ton capacity for that. And so you see that in Malaysia. We went from motorbikes to small cars to multi-passenger vehicles and SUVs, and they're all being used as a single person commuter.
Hi, my name is Palash Mukherjee. I'm from the Center for Science and Environment. I work in Delhi. So my question is to Horizon and regarding two-wheelers and three-wheelers. In India, we've seen a very big explosive growth of three-wheelers. The estimates for numbers for e-rickshaws are around the million mark.
1.5 million, they say.
1.5 million, okay. The number can be debated, but
Big number.
yeah, it's a big number, nonetheless, yes. But I just had a two-part question. The first part was that you spoke about the need for data for registration, for insurance, and these are problems that we've come across in India as well, especially in Delhi, less in the other smaller cities. But one of the key reasons that we've figured out that there was such an explosive organic growth is precisely because they were in the informal sector. There wasn't any kind of registration required, there weren't any barriers. So how do we negotiate this space? Because the moment you make them formal, same thing, the distinction between e-rickshaws and now Bajaj is coming up with electric rickshaws. But those are much more expensive because they adhere to the regulatory framework. So the moment you make e-rickshaws formal, you make them more expensive and therefore you lose out on the market share. So that is the first part of my question. The second part is with all this explosive growth, what do we do with the batteries, especially for countries like ours that don't have the resources and don't have the regulatory framework to manage recycling of batteries currently.
Okay. Excellent questions and very good observations. There's various different ways to go about it. One issue that a lot of countries face is when they try to implement new legislation on existing vehicles is what do you do with the fleet vehicles that exist? Do you grandfather them in? Do you require them to do a one-time registration or something like that? And that's difficult because then everybody says, well, they got away with no registration and now I have to register. So that's a political decision that you have to make. My suggestion is, yes, you make them do a simple one-time registration, make it inexpensive. Also, to avoid increasing the price of these extremely efficient vehicles, what I recommend to Malaysia is you say you increase the registration fee not on these vehicles, but on luxury vehicles, SUVs, multi-passenger vehicles. Increase them by €1 or whatever. And then what you do is you essentially subsidize the registration fees of these smaller vehicles to try to encourage the utilization of more efficient vehicles. So yeah, you do need to pay for it. Other recommendations are make it as streamlined and simple and inexpensive as possible to try to just from the very start reduce the expenditures required. The question on batteries. We anticipated a big problem with lead-acid battery dumping. We never saw it because it's a very valuable material. I mean, we've got guys scavenging lead-acid batteries continuously. The lithium-ion batteries, yeah, there are some precious materials in there. They're a much smaller environmental concern, and recycling of them is financially much more problematic. It's just it's not quite there yet. So is battery dumping a problem? Potentially, but I mean the volume we're talking about is still reasonably manageable. You could always insist on sequestering them, but it's not really a big environmental hazard at this point. Not those.
No, I disagree.
And Axel disagrees with me. I'll let it was true.
I totally agree with the points that you made with regards to making the registration, how do you say, it's cost neutral in that sense. Maybe it also just this addition in terms of trying to do some cost subsidizations, like you can hide some of the cost, or how to say, like transfer it not just only in terms of the vehicle taxes, but also you can look into how how to integrate the differentials in for example, the road use, and also probably look into existing funds that you probably have in the countries. Like for example, in the Philippines at least, we still have this special vehicle pollution control fund. I think it's 0.7% out of the vehicle registration fees that are allocated for environmentally sustainable transport projects. So you kind of look into these small pockets of funding and finances so to be able to cover incremental costs that would be there when you're formalizing the movement.
Assume we have a big pile of lithium batteries and a fire starts. I wish you good luck. One of the problems we face, we have no recycling facility today. Why? It's too costly. It's more costly, lithium 3 times more from recycling than from normal mining. So nobody is doing this. This is one of the many things if you not require. And if you require, it makes electric batteries more expensive. So you are in a cycle which you cannot solve. This is one of the problems. Give an example. I have an e-bike. It's now 3 years old, my battery is going down. I have to buy a new one. The new one cost me 550 euros. It's no more than value of the bike. So if you look on all these things, you have to include all the costs. If the battery only lasts 3 years, forget this. This is not cost effective. Not for the consumer. He believes he has a cheap product, but the overall cost in the end will be much higher. Then you have a good regulation. For cars, we require now at least 7 years warranty by the manufacturer. Why not for e-bikes? Why have a bicycle which is rotten after 3 years? Why is the consumer not protected against this? This is not cost effective. They see a cheap bike for 500 euros, but you pay in the end 2,000. This is not what is effective. We are wasting our resources. And this is what I require, at least a 7-year warranty for batteries for bicycles as well, or motorcycles. Look at all these piles we get in the next years. Look on the big amount of bicycles in China. What happens? This is really, people have to think about what are the consequences of this policy, not looking if there's a problem on the table. And these billions, in the end, in China, billions of batteries you have to dump. Where you dump it? How you make it safe? I have no solution for this anymore. I don't know how to do it. So, make legislation without thinking on the consequences. And this you should avoid. Don't repeat our mistakes we have done in these countries.
7 years is a very admirable lifetime goal. We settled on 300 discharge cycles in Malaysia, which equates to a couple years of
no, it's one year for me. It's 1 year for me.
For what we've seen in the Malaysian vehicles is it's a couple years, 2-3 years. We have consumers who drive these vehicles and are very happy with them. We also see a lot of manufacturers that fail. We have manufacturers where after 4 months the batteries are gone, and as was mentioned, the customers are very disappointed, and when they buy it, they expect it to last some period of time. And it's an unknown factor with battery electric vehicles, which is why, as Dr. Axel mentioned, the life cycle testing of these things is very, very important.
Okay, good morning. I'm Ahmed from Nutrition. Question maybe to the panel, a very short question, because I'm not really good on these battery issues, but I understand that batteries are using minerals. So what is the future of the minerals in the future? Because we had wars for petroleum. So how about the minerals? Because I think the Congo country, they have issues with cobalt. So what is the, and then Toyota is saying about 2050, you're going to have fully electrolyzed vehicle. The question is our resources for the minerals high enough to support all this EV system that we've been talking about?
One of the most important.
We will take one more question before
magnets.
the speakers reply.
Thank you, Bert. I have 2 questions to ask. One is now in Sri Lankan case, we provided some of the tax incentives and we have more than 50% of the electric fleet now in the operational fleet. now already I think we have spent almost 7-8 years. So now the one other thing about this battery recycling, I think that's the problem we have to face now, because if you take the beat, more than 50% of the batteries are now probably, I think within a couple of years time it is coming on, which has not been addressed at the level of policy making on the tax incentive, one. And secondly, about the electric vehicle, also we gave a zero tax, where the peat has been started coming, but problem is free charging is basically doing with the grid supply coming out from mostly the thermal power. So we are reducing the mobile sources, but still the resources are coming out. So then I don't know whether we are meeting the objective. So at the moment when we are designing the policies, this too has not been considered as a cost to the society. So this is one of the key things we have to consider, I think.
Take note of the questions. We will finish with a few more questions, and then you can get your last statements as well.
Patrick Bugger, GIZ. So we just heard, so everything is rather technology driven, the entire discussion here as well. And so we've heard about all these problems, all these technologies have. So I would just like to remind you that non-motorized transport is extremely important. We really, really have to promote it. So if you think about cycling, if you think about walking, this has been not a big subject in this room today, but this is so important. If you want to really get to a zero-emission mobility, we have to think about non-motorized transport. And it's doing as well some good things to your health, it fights obesity and so on. So there are only positives, really. Of course, there's some sort of mobility you can't do with non-motorized transport or non-motorized modes of transport. But there is a lot, as we all know, there's a lot of transport that only goes on for, 400 or 500 meters or a kilometer, and you could easily use a bike or your legs.
Yeah, definitely.
I think good urban design, good urban planning is the most effective long-term plan.
I'm from Nepal, and regarding e-mobility in our country, it's also a good concern, because especially during 2015, when we have an unofficial blockade, more than 55% of our fossil fuel vehicles were stopped. So people started to think and asking the question to the government and civil society, now what to do, which kind of e-mobility we should go. And regarding our country, we are since the country where we don't have manufacturers. So do you consider a country like Nepal, where political things are one side, technical things are one side, also geographical things, because there are so many roads which go hills upside and down, and people, they don't, though they are willing to buy for example, the simple thing they afford now is like e-scooter or e-bikes, they don't want it because they doubt that they will not support in the hills and mountains. And we don't have the manufacturers also. So there are so many problems, and but we have a huge source of electricity, and lots of hydropower electricity projects are going on. So soon there are potential of those kinds of things also. And so I just like to request the manufacturers countries on that side, and supporting to the another idea that we should support the non-motorized transport system, cycling and all. And also another thing regarding the transportation is that in this age of digitization, there is also various ideas like teleworking and flexible timing and all, which also reduces the transportation and system. So this kind of I think because in my case I have to take 1 hour to travel from my place to the office. So many times I consider to reduce the time by working from the home. So lots of people now have started to do that, which has also reduced the mobility, and which can also be a strategy for avoiding the transport. And I think the roadmap to real zero emission is not regarding the automobile, but the integrated system, which we should talk everything from the public transport and non-motorized transport system, digitization, and to the people who can afford the cars and vehicles, for them the clean options. So that's all. Thank you.
Very good.
Let's start from the end. Let's start from
1 minute each.
Yes, one start from the end. We have studies which showed home working increase the overall mileage, but it would be a complex issue to explain this. On bicycle, I'm a big fan of bicycle, who knows me, but we made a calculation how much CO2 you can save in Germany. It's 8 million tons, and we have to save 600 million tons. So it just shows it's a share, but it's not the biggest one. I would call it elsewhere emission, not zero emission. We should have created this word. This is not what we have to do. We have to make, at the same time, progress on the production of electricity. Otherwise, it's not working. And people have to understand. And please, look on all the consequences, as just mentioned on this home working. It looks nice in the beginning. What happened? People had a longer distance in the end. So overall, the travel time and level amount was bigger. So it's really look not only in technology, but also social development and things happening in society. So I only tell you, things are more complex than the most people think. Don't believe simple answers. They're always wrong.
Excellent. We don't always agree, but we're in agreement on a lot of stuff. Good urban design forms the basis of any efficient transport system. The problem is it takes a very long time. You have to start with that. So battery, end of life. What do we do about it? Standards. You can insist on the batteries being returned to somewhere and deal with it that way. What do we do about different hills and different areas? Standards. We have a hill climb spec for our country. Rwanda has a very different, they have some very hilly, Nepal. What you'll do is you say, well, we need vehicles that can go up, and if it meets our spec, it'll be useful on our roads. So you can address all these things via standards. This legislation does require some, competent government and governance and authority, but in the end, it can be done in a cost-effective way that protects the environment, your customers, and ensures compatibility of your well-designed urban landscape.
If I talk about the type of the vehicle electrification or the type of the products, most important is the customer acceptance. From technical point of view, of course we can make argument which technology is the best, but ideally which should we, what kind of activity we should do it or something. But even the hybrid vehicles, the reason why we do not sell so much of a hybrid vehicle in Asia compared to Japan is not so much customers still do not want to buy it. So on the basis of the policy framework of the customer acceptance, we are ready to introduce all the type of XUV, all our products range into any countries. So at the beginning stage, of course, some kind of incentive scheme might be necessary for manufacturers, but for the users, that is the most important point, I believe.
I'll just take 10 seconds. So I have 3 takeaway messages. One is for those scientific, technical research, keep on doing what you believe. Of course, there are no one size fits all. So whatever I present is, like I said, is only based on the case that we are looking at. Of course, there are other things in around outside assumption. The second one is, I think, right now, I think in Thailand we're also trying to make recommendation based on the scientific knowledge or result to the policymaker. Of course, I wish, like what you mentioned, that Europe make it work, but why not in Asia? I mean, that's the same question I was asking over and over. Like, I also wish there are some certain regulations being implemented, but as we are going there, maybe like what I think some comment earlier a few days ago that ASEAN work like glacier. I think somebody made that. Like it's very slow, but you take like that snapshot 1 year and the next year that it move. But it's very, very slow, right? And 3 is just believe in low emission transport.
I would add. When I believe, I go to church. If I want to know, I measure.
Okay, for me, 3 short things, just in summary of what we have here. So the roadmap to real zero emissions mobility does not only refer to roads. Second one, the roadmap to real zero emissions mobility is not real, but aiming for zero, it will get us to the lowest level that we can.
That's good. So the title is wrong. We invite you to the GIZ launch pad. I think the chatbot would be lunch. So after this session, in the coffee area. I'd like to thank everyone. The speakers definitely. Thank you very much.